Hey, Sean, this is Dr. Nelson. I do this a lot with students, by the way. Instead of writing a long email, sometimes it's better just to talk, and I'm not up there very often, so it's just easier sometimes to shoot emails back and forth. Um, so I finally read the thing you gave me. So I'm glad I did, because I actually, when we were talking, I had a different idea of what you were saying. So I like it. I like it a lot, actually. And in fact, one of the reasons I wanted to record something real short is I think you actually could. I know you're just starting out, but I think you could turn this into a capstone if you wanted to. I know forestry is what you're interested in, and so I'm not trying to deviate you from that. And I also know I think you're, kind of came in working with prior, and I don't want to take you off that either. But if you wanted to, I think this could turn into a really interesting capstone, because I'm not sure if you set it up this way, but to me, an environmental history of immigration, and specifically, you're really looking at Latin American immigration, right? The southern border. I'm sure there is some studies out there about this. I'm not necessarily off the top of my head familiar with any, but I think this could be a really interesting topic that might be fairly unique. And so I'd encourage you not just to do it as a paper in the class, but if you start looking for a capstone and you don't already have idea, I think this really could be quite interesting, because it's an interesting way to take a controversial topic and come at it kind of from a totally different angle. I don't know if you've watched the Changes in the Land video yet, but that's kind of how I was explaining the importance of that book, is it took a familiar story and came at it from a different angle. And, again, I think looking at this kind of from the environmental viewpoint, the trick is, both for my class, and I guess I need to just keep it about my class and not trying to get you to do a capstone yet. But no matter however you do this, the trick is going to be trying to keep politics out, right? You want to just focus on the story, and not, because, immigration is one of those issues we all got opinions on, and try to keep those out of the picture and just sort of focus on, you know, looking at this very familiar story, but from a different perspective. So first off, I would choose, and I can't remember if you said, because I'm looking at my own notes that I wrote. I can't remember if you got super. I guess you're looking at California. Okay, you're looking at California. So I would pick one area, maybe whether it's Texas or Arizona, New Mexico, or California, just to keep it without getting too big. What you want to do is kind of like what Cronin did, I think, is you first would want to look at the land itself, pre-human, human, what are the ecosystems we're talking about, kind of a baseline, and then look at how it's changed with immigration, or if it's changed with immigration. A couple of things I think, I have like 10 things here. You can't do all of these in a paper, but some of the things you can be looking at and you can come up with your own. First off, I mean, both the US government and the Mexican government. Now, obviously, people are going to be from other parts of South America, but since Mexico is right on the border, I mean, there are different policies about the environment between these two countries. That's something to think about. I think class is something to think about. And this can get tricky, but I know I grew up middle class, but my family's very working class. I show my mom's side, and they do have a different attitude about nature. I mean, they love nature. My family are shrimpers and crabbers and fishermen. And, they hunt and they fish, and they really appreciate nature, but they do have a totally different viewpoint than I do. For instance, TEDs, which were the turtle exclusionary devices that were by law put into shrimp nets back in the 90s, which I'm not going to lie, I supported that effort. But for a lot of my family, they just cannot understand, why would people care about turtles over humans? To them, nature is important, but it was something you made money from. It's something you used to feed your family. And the reason I say all that is, I think, again, when you're looking at these people coming over, they're going to have a totally different viewpoint of what's important to them because of their background, because of their circumstances, than maybe somebody in America looking at some of this. So I think different environmental viewpoints of the people, whether we're talking about Mexicans, or I'm just making this up, or Guatemalans, how do they view nature versus how, say, middle-class America views nature, right? What are also the policies of the governments? And again, we talked about the trouble with wilderness, right? Wilderness is kind of in a way, it's kind of a middle class idea. It's sort of, um, a country has to have enough money to then set aside land to preserve. You don't have enough money, you're going to use that land every bit you got. But once you have enough money and enough power and all that, you can then feel free to set aside land, right? It's kind of like putting money in the bank for a rainy day. If you don't have a lot of money, you ain't got no money to put in the bank. So that's kind of where I mean by class and stuff. And I should have practiced this. I'm kind of rambling right now. Anyway, well, another weird example is, like again, a lot of my family, if they see a snake, they kill it. It's like you don't think twice. You kill a snake, which I have a hard time doing. And I have a lot of friends that have pet snakes and they love snakes and they say, oh, snakes are really important, which I would agree with. But there are also people who've never lived, in the woods and really had to worry about a snake coming into their house and biting one of their children. It's just a totally different relationship. Most of my family, just again, I'm using them as examples. They buy a chunk of land, they cut all the trees down immediately. Partly they can make money off those trees, and they're worried about trees falling on their house. And I would be very different. I would buy land. I want to keep as many of the trees as I want. So then, like, I see trees all the time. I live in the woods. I want to get rid of the trees so I can see my land. I just want to. I think that's something to take into consideration. But disease is something to be thinking about. Pollution is something to be thinking about. And I guess back into different policies and different views of nature. Also, I mean, to get away from the humans for a moment, what are the natural barriers? Rivers, mountains, deserts, and even looking at the cultures that lived on this land, long before Mexico or United States existed. Sewage is another one to be thinking about. You got lots of people, you also start thinking about the impact, first off, the impact of these people walking on the land, even the impact of a fence. We talked about building a fence. In fact, that may not be a bad way to, as I'm talking, that may not be a bad way to frame this. What's the environmental impact of a fence on the natural world? I mean, that has a huge impact, right? But also when you look at the natural world, look at like, why are people coming here versus going this way? In other words, nature is going to dictate where these people are coming through. What are the natural pathways that they're going to be using to come over? And I bet a lot of these are going to go back to pre-US, pre-Mexican pathways a lot of times. Something else to think about, I think, we might think a lot about like the impact immigrants have, but the United States also has an impact on the environment, and like the wall, that we may not always think about, what you might call hidden environmental costs. Again, going back, I mean, I've been to Mexico, right? And even looking at some of my own family, a lot of times I'll, like I have an uncle who's a shrimper, and you go to his house, and I mean, he's a wonderful guy. It's not a knock, but he just has stuff everywhere. Bits of engines in his yard, and he's the kind of guy that throws the trash over his shoulder. I'll pick that up later, kind of guy, right? So to me, it's very obvious when he'll pour oil on the ground. He doesn't care, right? Good guy. But when it comes to the environment, totally different attitude than I have. So it's obvious his environmental impact. My environmental impact may not be so obvious, although it's there. I use, plastics. I drive a car, carbon emissions. I use electricity that has a carbon footprint. It's just that my environmental, phones that eventually I'm going to throw away. What happens to the battery in this? My environmental impact is more hidden than my uncle's environmental impact. So think about that with, on both, if you're looking at the land, not just looking at the immigrants, but if you're looking at the land, we could probably see the immigrant impact a lot quicker, the footpaths, the trash. But think about the impact on the land of a developed nation like the United States. What kind of impact are we having on the land too? So you want to tell both sides of that story. And again, I would look a little bit at some of the areas on the southern border, maybe where there aren't people coming over, or there's not development on our side. And is there a difference? It's a huge topic. You could write a whole book about this. Like I said, it's a really interesting topic. You're just going to be writing a paper, so you can't do too much. But you definitely want to look at the land itself, the history of the land a little bit. And that's why I say a smaller area might be better to think about. So you can really kind of do that. And then maybe pick 2 or 3 impacts. And you've already talked a little bit about this, but look at a couple of impacts that both sides are having on that land. I think this is a really interesting topic. Like I said, the trick will be, and don't take this the wrong way, you have strong opinions and you let them out. I know that, it's been a little, that's the thing. I'm going to start learning how to reel you in a little bit, because you definitely have strong opinions. And trying to keep some of that out of the paper is really important. It's tough. It's tough for me sometimes. You got to, but if you did this at the capstone, I think it would be really interesting. But again, that would be really tricky not to get too, because, you don't want to trigger some of the other professors. But anyway, it's a great idea. I'm glad you came up with it. And it's something I don't think I would have come up with on my own. So good work. And think about it. Right now, worry about the midterm. But I guess since you do need to get working on this, I want to let you know that first off, it's a great topic. And 2, I just want to give you some ideas to think about. I'm sure I'll think of some others later, but I just wanted to go ahead and get this to you real quick. All right. Good luck with everything, buddy.